New York City mayoral candidates are nearing the home stretch of campaigning and squared off one last time before the start of early voting. Last night's debate featured 5 of the city's leading Democratic candidates. Off the bat, frontrunner Eric Adams was pressed to answer where exactly he lives. The question was posed over growing concerns whether or not he has a home in the city that he is vying to lead. So Rachel Holliday Smith is following this race for us. She's a reporter for the city and moderated a different debate last night for the New York City comptroller. Thank you so much for joining us. So for people like me, I don't live in New York City. This whole issue with Adams and where he lives is kind of humorous, kind of fascinating. Right off the bat, they started asking him about that. I'm wondering how he defended himself. I thought that this was already sort of taken care of because I know he had the media take a tour of the home that he says he lives in. There are a lot of questions, though, because at the beginning of the pandemic, he actually moved into Borough Hall. So many people are saying, well, yes. Where exactly do you live? Did he answer that question?
Right. He continues to say, I am going to be here in New York. I live in Brooklyn. There is no controversy about this. I've said it a million times, and I'm in New York. I live in New York. But, you know, people are questioning how he actually lives in New York because, as you said, yeah, he actually did a tour at the beginning of the pandemic to say, hey, I'm actually sleeping in Borough Hall. I actually spend a lot of time there and actually sleep there most nights to do work. And he has, said that he has a partner, a girlfriend who lives in Fort Lee, New Jersey, and he does, drive back and forth there. He's done some events, virtual events from there. So he's at least spending some time in New Jersey, also spending a lot of time holed up in Borough Hall. He does have a home in Bedford-Stuyvesant, a neighborhood in Brooklyn. But, as the news cycle was consumed with this week, we don't know if he actually lays his head. That was the question, whether he actually lays his head in Bedford-Stuyvesant and actually uses that fridge and uses that basement apartment. And it's caused a lot of, I won't say controversy, but I'll say conversation in New York this week. That's for sure.
Okay, let me just ask you one more question on that, and then we'll get into the actual issues. But I am curious as to whether or not, I know this is great for the other candidates to sort of pick at him over, but do the voters care?
I think that the voters do care in as much as it is a character portrait, right? We're trying to get to know these candidates a little bit better. This is not about policy. This is not about politics even. So some people will say, who cares, right? Like, this is not something that I really will make a difference for me. But I think that, for the people who don't really know Eric Adams and to want to know a little bit more about him as a person, I think it's quite interesting to folks. Whether it'll move the polling numbers and actually come down to more or less votes, I don't know. He's polling very high in recent polls. And, I think he's still got quite a good chance of winning. I don't know if this will hurt him that much. He's definitely still a front runner.
So let's get on to the major topic of policing and police reform and crime. A year ago in the summertime, there were, protest demonstrations all across the country, including a lot in New York. There were calls for reform, also calls for defunding the police. Since then, New York City has seen a spike in crime, and the conversation has changed a little bit. So how did the candidates tackle the issue of guns and the issue of police reform?
Yeah, so in the debate last night, I'll say that, there was a question about whether or not the candidates would take guns away from police, which I'm not aware of this being, something that people have been considering. But interestingly, Maya Wiley, wasn't super clear on that she wouldn't do that. She said, I wouldn't answer that question in the debate. All the others said, of course, no, I would not do that. But this goes to the real, focus on, yes, the spike in some categories of violent crime. I should say that overall crime in New York City is still at pretty historic lows. And there have also been rise in violent crime in cities across the country. So New York is not different than other cities in that way. But, people have, the different candidates have said, how are we going to deal with the budget of the NYPD? Most of the more moderate Democrats have said, we need to support our police. I'm not necessarily for the defund the police movement. I'm not for cutting the NYPD budget. Maya Wiley, again, is different in that regard. She says, let's cut $1 billion from the very large budget of the NYPD. So there is some differentiation there between the Democrats. And, for lifelong New Yorkers, native New Yorkers who lived through some really high crime times in the city, I do think that it's a concern. Folks are seeing an uptick in shootings and violent incidents, and they're saying, have a real anxiety about going back to those days when that was much more frequent. But I just also need to point out again that overall crime is historically still very low in New York.
And I really appreciate you adding that context for sure. What were some of your other sort of big takeaways in watching the debate?
Well, it was very active. It was sort of a mudslinging moment. It was a really active, energetic debate. They talked about their relationship with Cuomo, how they would handle, Governor Cuomo and the relationship there. It's historically been a very fraught relationship, trying to get the top guy in Albany to help New York City. And interestingly, Andrew Yang said, "Oh, well, I know the Cuomos. I know Chris Cuomo. I think I can handle it well." Some of the other candidates attacked him for that. It was a real back and forth. The progressives, I will say, Maya Wiley and Scott Stringer were going after each other for different pieces of their records. Audits from Scott Stringer, who is the city comptroller. And for Maya Wiley, she was a former member of the de Blasio administration, so he was attacking her on that. So it was a real lively one. And, early voting starts tomorrow. So this is really a really good chance on a televised stage for the candidates to get their punches in. And that's exactly what they did last night.
All right. Well, we have been following the race, and we're going to continue to see how it all pans out once voting starts. Rachel Holliday Smith, thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you.
CBSN New York streamed last night's debate and is covering the final days ahead of the primary. You can stream the coverage 24/7 via the CBS News app. You can also check out CBSN's other local streams.